En el video que te mostraré, algunos hombres basados y algunos hombres exageradamente delicados conversarán sobre la masculinidad, sobre el supuesto patriarcado y cuestiones similares. Mira el video completo y dime qué opinas. Me gusta muchísimo leer tus comentarios. Sin mayor dilación, comencemos.
Jordan, toxic masculinity, you believe it is a thing. What is it?
Well, I'm aware that the phrase is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but
let's do it.
In my experience, I think the reason why it can be prefixed with toxic is when the traits associated with an energy or a gender, in this case masculinity, end up or culminate in the harm of oneself and another. I think that's when something becomes toxic.
You've talked about James Bond and the kind of role models that you grew up with. What's the problem with something like James Bond when it comes to translating a feeling of, quote, toxic masculinity?
Well, I think what I came to realise from trying to unpack my own toxicity and my own understanding of myself, I just realised there's a big issue with men and responsibility, I think, and often in our growing up, things like processing emotions, that's a massive responsibility, an emotional responsibility that one has to have for themselves. And the reason I used role models like James Bond or rock stars we idolise and whatever else is, it seems historically there's a kind of opportunity to be emotionally irresponsible, as it were. When I look at James Bond factually, he's kind of like this womanizing, murderous. Yeah.
He's a character.
Of course he's a character, but I mean, it's a character that you're looking to aspire to unconsciously as a child. So because that's something that you're seen as depicted as a hero.
Yeah, I don't think there's any research that shows that children look to unconsciously adopt James Bond's image as a child.
No. It doesn't. They don't have a choice. That's the whole point, though. Is that like if you're shown that as an idea, a statement, an ideal of what a man is considered to be, then I think that has an effect on how people view
Martin,
themselves.
toxic masculinity, what does it mean to you? Is it a thing?
It means to me what it means to most people, nothing. It's one of the least helpful and the most damaging phrases of all that surrounds this debate around what it means to be a man, because it entirely focuses on the bad things men do. Usually a few bad men, their attitude, their behaviour is used to exemplify that of everybody, and it entirely ignores the positive elements of being a man, which are actually massively in short supply in modern society. Fatherlessness. I do a lot of work in jails, serious Category A prisoners. When you look at their life story, 3/4 of those men didn't have dads. They grew up around absent fathers. Now, how is that toxic masculinity? They would have benefited from positive masculinity, positive role models in schools, in young men's lives.
The fact that they are the father has been absent is toxic.
Why is that?
Because it's emotionally irresponsible. That's the whole point.
No. Okay, so why are those fathers present? That would imply what? They do it through choice. In fact, how about if we look at a system which prevents fathers from being involved in their children's lives quite often? Is that toxic masculinity?
Explain the system you mean.
The boom in men in their 40s is ostensibly and primarily driven by fathers who want access to their children can't get it. But what's toxic about that?
Como ves, los progres usan el término masculinidad tóxica para desacreditar características tradicionales de la masculinidad como la fuerza, la autoridad, la autosuficiencia y la provisión, cualidades fundamentales para una sociedad sana.
How do you self-identify?
I'm born a man, but I don't identify as cisgender. About half time of the week I have a drag alter ego and I perform as her for a living. Essentially what that means is, I use they pronouns because I don't 100% identify with my male body all the time and don't often feel comfortable being perceived as a man. I was brought up in the Middle East in quite conservative households, and the Middle East is quite homosocial, men only, women only, and there was very little space for me.
Toxic masculinity in the Middle East?
Toxic masculinity, I understand your reservation with that point, but I do think masculinity can be toxic, and I think there is a difference between the two.
Yeah.
Toxic masculinity, as in all masculinity is toxic, I understand your reservation.
Yeah, I don't think it all is either. I think there's a huge tenderness to masculinity. I think it's,
The masculinity,
and
like
we talk side to femininity, which we don't discuss either. So,
but it doesn't have as much of an effect.
There's
all of society's bad is caused by men, and men are only capable of bad. That's what toxic masculinity
I missed your first bit. What did you just say about femininity?
It can also have a dark side.
But a lot of that, the kind of negative associations that you think are associated with femininity are actually conducted by a system of patriarchy that is not a woman's fault. Actually, the things that we read as feminine, and we see...
What do you mean by a system of patriarchy for those
Well,
who...
that's another made-up thing.
Well, hang
It's
on.
a made-up thing to you because you...
What is the patriarchy?
I do think it's quite funny that the people I often find getting annoyed at the words toxic masculinity, patriarchy are people who tend to kind of benefit from that structure. I.e., you're nodding your head, but you are one of those.
They
people.
might be offended because it's a pejorative. It's a
but
pejorative. It's a stereotype of a whole class of people.
I'll tell you what. Let me
you've got the freedom to decide your group identity.
Throw the tennis ball back over here. Okay, carry on.
Patriarchy is the systemic privileging of certain identities in society. Patriarchy, for me, is the exclusion or oppression of minority identities to the privilege of a few. It is literally how everything is conducted. I mean, you even watch
the male gaze
let me just
as well.
So the dark sides of the feminine, which occasionally manifest, are largely or very often directly to do with the patriarchy.
Well, incels are quite interesting here. What we're talking about with Toronto, obviously we need more information on that. But I think it's Eric Wright, who is the one who 14 women. You know, his problem was a lot of women are I don't know if or kind of they brought it to the
unconscious misogyny.
And it was their fault for not having slept with him.
It's in like
there's a good dose of psychopathy.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let's throw here. Eric, go on.
Right, so the term toxic masculinity is a pejorative. It's a
patriarchy.
Stereotype.
Let's pick up
the term patriarchy had roots in cultural anthropology. It refers to a system of governments, but it's been overly applied to the situation today. So there is no legal exclusion from women from the right to participate in any social matters, in any governmental matters, in today's modern society. Now, that doesn't say that women don't have some issues. I'm not saying that at all. But to say patriarchy is an overgeneralization, it becomes this grand narrative to try to explain things when actually it's sort of a meaningless, difficult to define. Feminists don't have a clear understanding what it is. It's very difficult to pin down what it is.
Well, I understand. Like you can be like you can get to the semantics and define words but it's like you've just skipped over the most important part of what you said, which is there are some problems. That's all people are talking about. You don't have to get into the definition of the word.
Patriarchy.
There are some problems, and some of those problems are also caused by women, because women are also, if patriarchy exists in the way that you use it, women are also complicit in patriarchy.
Which would have...
There quite clearly is no patriarchy extant in Western society at the moment. It's an absolute nonsense. The word patriarchy means a system of government or rule in which fathers or father figures preside. If you look at Europe now, you have Angela Merkel, you have Theresa May, you have Nicola Sturgeon. I mean, Hillary Clinton that close. You might say that there was
a in comparison.
Amber Rudd is the Home Secretary and Diane Abbott is the shadow. Women are in extremely senior positions, and to pretend that we still live in some kind of tribal father figure-led society is a nonsense. If you want to use a term that means something other than patriarchy, choose a word other than patriarchy, and then we will avoid...
I mean, also, you're just looking at things really, really, like, on a micro level. Actually, when you broaden out, I mean, 15% less women earn 15% less overall in Europe.
No, that's not comparing like for like.
What it feels like to me is a lot of males in power are slightly uncomfortable with the fact that civil rights movements and women and people of colour are finally having a voice, and they see that as a slight kind of, this feels like an attack.
What data do you use to support that supposition? Because what that is a stereotype against men that's made without data or evidence, and that is the definition of prejudice.
I'm not... No.
Al igual que el hombre de uñas rosa, yo nací siendo cacatúa, pero ahora me siento un ser humano. Además, yo no veo el supuesto patriarcado en ningún lugar. ¿Y tú?
I just think it's like interesting that everyone on this side of the panel just seems to like be dismissing women's experiences, the whole
Why don't you hear her out?
Let me speak.
Why don't you let her finish?
I'm not finished yet.
I'm so sorry, she's not finished. Excuse me.
I've not finished yet.
You behave yourself and show some manners.
I just wanted to say that, like, I just thought it's kind of ironic that all the people on this side are kind of just like saying that, oh, it's not all men, it's just a few men. But like, I've had experiences nearly every day of men degrading me in some way or making me feel belittled or like speaking over me, which is actually just be done right now. And I just think,
you're pigeonholing me.
Women do
I'm not
Just listen,
pigeonholing you.
bro.
I'm
Literally.
just saying that, like,
not about you,
that,
about
like,
broad experience.
Like, I'm only 20 and I've experienced on multiple occasions and like, I just think it's kind of belittling to my experiences for people to say that like women don't like that it's just as hard for men, because I don't think it is really. I feel like women are disadvantaged in ways that men aren't, even though I do agree that men are disadvantaged in different ways, but I don't think it's like right to dismiss all of feminism because you think it doesn't pander to you necessarily, when actually...
Yeah.
Any men in the audience?
As a person of colour, on a daily basis, I'm at threat of a racist attack. In fact, that's happened to me many, many times. At airports, I've been caught. I've had people not sit next to me. I mean, I have seen so much kind of racism on a micro daily level. I'm just trying to show...
What about homophobia in the Arab world?
Homophobia, okay. As a drag queen, my friend got beat up the other day. Someone literally just hit them with a bottle, right? Now, what I'm going to say is...
Was that not worse in the Arab world than it is here, the homophobia?
It is very bad in the Arab world, and it happens here as well. But what I'm saying is that is, being a person of colour, a constant risk of racism. Women, as well, are a constant risk of misogyny every second of every day. And men are not the same. Their gender does not make them a disadvantage every second, every day. That is the difference between structural sexism... And let me finish. I haven't finished.
He's wrong, and I'll tell him what's wrong. Okay, so I find it spectacularly predictable and really depressing the way this conversation is going today. Because, like, on the one hand, it's like we are once again taking rapists, the most violent, the most toxic, the most misogynistic, awful, evil men, and somehow saying, therefore...
You're all like that.
You're all like that.
No one's saying that.
Let me finish. You guys have had a lot of time. And what this has a real effect in the real world. I speak in schools. I speak with tens of thousands of British teenagers. I talk about the potential dangers of online to young men and templates. I speak in jails to lifers. About toxic masculinity, what it means. I speak to frontline service providers in education and mental health and fatherlessness and all of this. And there's a permissive attitude out there that this conversation makes men and boys issues irrelevant or second fiddle. And that has a real effect. And I'll tell you demonstrably how this works. You go into Parliament, as I do, in the Men and Boys Coalition, and say, OK, so for 15 straight years, white working-class boys have been at the bottom of education stack. This is provably true. And black boys are behind black girls. Every level of boys are behind. This is just a fact. It's not victimhood mentality, it's truth. Can we please do something about that? I don't know if we can. Because there's this feeling that men have it good, all men are toxic. It gets in the way of progress.
I didn't say all men are toxic.
It actually gets in the way of helping the needy.
Listen,
it
toxic
does.
masculinity...
Trust me.
No, this is what I'm trying to say is I'm not in any way saying that all masculinity is toxic. I think masculinity is brilliant. The toxicity of masculinity is when it harms oneself and others. So I'm saying... Right.
Yeah, some aspects of masculinity
I'm trying to say...
some men.
Aprovecharse de un acontecimiento registrado en cámara para generalizar que lo que se ve en ese momento refleja cómo es la vida cotidiana en general puede llevar a conclusiones erróneas, porque no se consideran las circunstancias particulares que rodearon el evento.
Do you think our biology determines the jobs we want to do and the way we want to be at home?
It doesn't determine it, but it's a big influencing factor. So, for example, if you ask yourself, why is it that after, I think, 30 or 40 million pounds of government money has gone into trying to get more women into engineering, been virtually unsuccessful, it's something like 5%. Whereas, medical students, 70% female. Men and women, given freedom, will make different choices. But this is also in part, men are what they are, in part as a reaction to what women expect from them. So, for example, I don't think I've heard the word hypergamy. Women try and find partners who are at least as well off as themselves, or have more money. Okay.
Hypergamy.
Hypergamy. Yeah. So it's very natural. It's very natural that men will work hard to try and get a good income, which will be attractive to a partner.
Why are you not jumping in saying that's pejorative?
Why didn't you I'm waiting to speak on something a little bit more important, which is the gender paradox, because it addresses this question specifically.
I was quite interested in hypergamy.
The gender paradox, it feeds into that. It's the bigger thing.
Okay.
The gender paradox is simply this, that according to the global index that looks at, sponsored by the United Nations, that looks at women's equality, the countries that have the highest women's equality initiatives, policies to get women into STEM, etc., paradoxically also have the lowest rates of women in those occupations.
Right, yeah.
So this is quite interesting, right? Because what it shows us is that in the socialist countries where childcare pays a living wage, and going into STEM obviously pays a living wage, that women are choosing to go into traditionally feminized roles by their own volition. And that is a paradox, because what that actually suggests is that it is more biology at play than it is social
I would
construction.
disagree. Can I disagree slightly? I think, for instance, I can talk from my perspective in the Middle East, right? Masculinity is really, really heralded as this really, really important thing, and men need to provide. And
so we're ahead of the game in the West.
I would never. I'm not going to generalize in that way, because yes, there are some issues in conservative Arab countries, but the West has also been responsible for a lot of the problems there as well. But what I will say is, a lot of women that I speak to from the Middle East who are sort of no longer partaking in the Middle East, I've often been complicit, they say, in their own subjection to the patriarchy or to male dominance, because that is the way that it goes there, and there's this expectation. So this sort of...
Which predated Western influence.
Basically, but in terms of what you were just saying, in terms of... But they chose to work in the home. I think that takes out... You're just looking at that as quite a factual thing, rather than starting to really just get a grasp on how systemic that expectation...
No, let me finish. That's what the gender paradox is. The countries that most socialize women to go into STEM have fewer women going into STEM. And that's why it's fascinating data. It's a paradox.
To be honest,
I didn't
it's
say
not a
paradox.
It's not a paradox. It's only a paradox if it's viewed through the sociological lens. It's
Precisely.
not a paradox if it's viewed through the evolutionary psychology lens.
That's
in that sense,
absolutely
it
correct.
conforms exactly to what you would expect. And it's not to say that women want to just stay in the home and raise children. They want to become vets. They want to become doctors. They want to work in psychology. They're interested in people. And I know this is a grotesque overstatement and a simplification, but broadly speaking, women are more interested in careers in which they are enabled to leverage their capacity for understanding and empathy, whereas men like to fiddle with cogs. You know, this is like how, unfortunately, to some extent, that's how it goes. But it doesn't
we do see it in our close relatives in the animal kingdom as well, don't we?
That doesn't represent a crisis. Sorry, that doesn't represent a crisis in masculinity. If that's all it were, if it were only about getting women into STEM and going to work for Google, that wouldn't be a crisis. The crisis comes from the fact that another group of men, another strata of men, have, broadly speaking, expected to be able to leverage their physical strength and their capacity for manual labour and long, tiring jobs like driving trucks up and down the roads, and those jobs are just disappearing. They're just going. The women's jobs are going to a far lesser degree. In fact, there is more and more work available in the care sector. Every passing year, we're having to import nurses and so on from other countries because we don't have enough. But jobs driving are going to disappear in the next 10 years. Already the job of, let's say, a dustman, which used to be, it wasn't like kind of the highest status job, but you had a certain respect for a guy who got his hands dirty and had a pint at the end of the day. That's now just pressing a button on the side of the truck and all the rest is done for you. And that'll all be done completely automated soon. Those jobs are disappearing, and that's what's undermining male confidence in the roles ahead of us.
La hipergamia es un término que describe la tendencia o práctica de buscar una pareja que esté en una posición social, económica o educativa más alta. Tradicionalmente, el concepto se ha utilizado para referirse a mujeres que buscan casarse con hombres que tienen un estatus superior al suyo, lo cual suele ocurrir.
Please ask a question to you. If you said a statistic, about divorce and men being related to that, why do you think a man's in that situation?
Because they're denied access to their children. We wouldn't be surprised if mothers in the same numbers if they were denied access to their children.
No, but I'm talking about in regards, is that only in situations where divorce has led to the lack of access, and what is that?
Well, why should divorce in itself lead to lack of access? The point is the family courts are designed to tear fathers out of their families.
Why do you think
they are designed to do exactly that. I mean, I could introduce you to 100 men who'll tell you that. But they still have to pay the money for the family, but they don't see their children. And that is just criminal emotional abuse of fathers and of their children.
Some people will argue, some people will say, oh, well, there has to be a reason for this.
Yeah. No, I think women get legal aid for just alleging abuse.
Courts are run
alleging abuse.
Nazir, can you throw any light on this?
Yeah, well, 1 in 4 women are domestically abused.
Yeah,
rubbish.
Yeah, literally.
How do you know that's
killed by their partners every week.
I think disproportionately, women and girls are the victims.
How is that rubbish?
The point is the judges listen to the evidence. It's the evidence that will determine their judgment.
The evidence shows us very clearly, and it has for decades, that men and women suffer domestic violence at similar rates. And where the violence is in one direction, the perpetrator is twice as likely to be a woman as a man.
Are you saying the statistics show that men suffer domestic violence at the same rates as women?
No.
Yes, that is absolutely defining for loads of studies. The Centers for Disease Control, the American, it's not the FBI, but yes, that is a absolute
But we're talking about domestic violence as well by other men.
Domestic
by fathers.
Which is why we change it to domestic violence, to recognize that women also beat men.
La disminución de la masculinidad tradicional en la sociedad moderna es una preocupación seria, ya que se percibe como un ataque directo a valores fundamentales como la fuerza, el liderazgo, la responsabilidad y la capacidad de provisión. Estos valores son cruciales para el bienestar de las familias y la estabilidad social, y su erosión refleja una decadencia cultural que no debe ser ignorada. Los hombres jóvenes se enfrentan a una crisis de identidad debido a las expectativas contradictorias y las presiones sociales que los alejan de los roles masculinos tradicionales. El énfasis en la igualdad de género y la crítica de la supuesta masculinidad tóxica han creado una confusión profunda sobre lo que significa ser un hombre en la actualidad, lo que contribuye a problemas graves como la falta de motivación, la depresión y conductas autodestructivas. La estructura familiar tradicional también se ve amenazada por esa disminución de la masculinidad. Los roles claramente definidos donde el hombre es el protector y proveedor son esenciales para el funcionamiento saludable de una familia. La erosión de estos roles puede desestabilizar las familias y en consecuencia la sociedad en su conjunto. Además, la sociedad está promoviendo una feminización que desalienta a los hombres a ser asertivos, competitivos y a asumir posiciones de liderazgo. Esta tendencia aleja a los hombres de su verdadera naturaleza y desnaturaliza los roles de género, lo que tiene consecuencias negativas tanto para los individuos como para la sociedad. Es esencial reafirmar la masculinidad tradicional, promoviendo que los hombres asuman roles de liderazgo, sean autosuficientes, protejan a sus familias y defiendan los valores que han sostenido a las sociedades a lo largo de la historia. Solo así se podrá contrarrestar la tendencia cultural que desvaloriza la masculinidad y garantizar un futuro estable y próspero. ¿Y tú qué opinas? Déjamelo saber en los comentarios. Y aquí culmina este video. Si te gustó, ya sabes qué hacer, dale like, comenta el video y compártelo. Asimismo, si te gusta este tipo de contenido, suscríbete a mi canal. Y ya que eres de los pocos que llegan hasta el final del video, te agradezco mucho por haberlo visto hasta el final. Muchas gracias, hasta luego.